Going to call the Business Operations and Finance Committee meeting to order. Ms. Dooley, a roll call, please.
Okay, Spencer Anderson. We know that he's not attending tonight. Sean Levy,
Present.
Joyce Ruff.
Present.
The roll reflects that only Spencer is absent.
All right. I need a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. Monthly financials, November 2021.
Good evening, excuse me. So this month we're looking at November of 2021. This is just a reminder that November is typically our low point. School district cash flows typically see a dip lowest in November. And we did not need to short-term borrow. We did get our equalization aid payment in early December. And what you will also see here is that the tax levies were set when the budget was approved, and they were booked as receivables. Okay, looking at the revenues without grants, there were really no major changes since October. The overall increase in the percent year-to-date is just due to the timing of payments this year versus last. And on the expense side, the year-to-date is trending about the same as last year. One major item is that our unemployment claims are down this year due to the reduced number of claims from COVID. And we are also starting to see credits roll in as the unemployment office is catching up with some corrections. So we should see some drops there. Revenue on the grant side, again, no major changes since October. One thing you will see is that the Perkins grant is being administered through CISA this year. So that just changes the bucket that it's in. So it will look separate, it'll look a little different this year. And then finally, on the expense side, really there were no significant changes since October. Any questions?
Board Member Ruff, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, no questions. All right, thank you.
This is an item that needs to be approved.
Gotcha. Approval, need a motion for the approval of the November 2021 financial reports, so that'll go to the full board.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. Item 3A, food service overview.
I'd like to introduce to you Elizabeth England. She is the district manager for Airmark, and Tim Butts, who is our food service director for the school district Bolite. They're going to do a presentation of the food service overview and a little bit of just to present you some of the programs that we are currently doing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn. Also with us today is Paul Overly. He is our Director of Strategic Partnerships, so he's just another layer of support. I just wanted to introduce the man in the back there, along with Tim. All right, so as Dawn said, this is just an overview. Really, we just wanted to share some of the stuff that we're doing, the programs that we're running, and just from about 10,000 feet, right? So we're not going to go into a bunch of details tonight, but I do want to give just a brief program overview. I don't know. Can I control the slides from here? Or?
No,
Okay. You'll just read the room and progress. Okay. Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So I'm going to do a program overview. Those acronyms don't mean anything yet, but they will in a moment. We're going to go over some program requirements, brief summary of program standards, a little bit of a deeper dive into the nutrition standards, which most people think about as standards for school lunch. We've got smart snacks in schools, which is another way of saying the a la carte nutrition standards. I'm going to touch on USDA foods, which is commonly called commodities. Community eligibility provision, so why does Beloit qualify for universal free meals? We're going to talk a little bit about that today. What it means to be contracting with a food service management company, and then how are we promoting school meals? So, thank you. Okay, so program overview. Next slide. Okay, so the National School Lunch Program is a federally assisted meal program operating in more than 94,000 public and nonprofit schools and residential child care institutions. It was established actually in 1946 under the National School Lunch Act signed by President Harry Truman, and it provides low cost or free lunches to more than 30 million children every day. And meals are basically counted, they are claimed, and then the district receives reimbursements for all the meals served that meet all of the standards. These are the programs that we operate in Beloit. So we are operating the National School Lunch Program, or the NSLP. We are operating the School Breakfast Program, SBP, the After School Snack Program, ASP, the Summer Food Service Program, SFSP, and then the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Grant, FFVG. So lots of acronyms, but we serve breakfast, lunch, snack, we serve meals in the summer, and we offer additional fresh fruits and vegetables during the day under the grant program. All right, program requirements. So many people, when they think of school lunch, they might think of, okay, there's some nutrition standards. We have a lot of program requirements. It's definitely more than just nutrition. So we have food safety standards, we have local wellness policy standards, we have monitoring, we have our own procurement standards that we have to meet. We have professional standards, standards around special dietary needs and how we accommodate those. The other thing I wanted to mention was that every chart or graphic on here is from the DPI website or from the USDA website. And there's, so I kind of left my cookie crumbs in the screenshot so you could see if you want to learn anything more about these topics. I just wanted to let you know where our source data was from. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to dive just a little bit deeper into the nutrition standards, which is under the menu planning section. So big picture, there are 5 meal pattern components. If you think back to the 5 food groups or the food guide pyramid, this is what you see represented here. So we have meat or meat alternate representing the protein, the grain, and then we have milk, and then fruits and vegetables. So the 5 components or the 5 food groups have to be offered at every single lunch or every single meal, we'll say, and what the students have to select is some of those. So they have to take 3 of the 5 at lunch to make it a reimbursable meal. But we offer at every single meal the meat alternates, grains, milks, fruits, and vegetables. So this is a little bit of an eye chart on this screen, but if you have it in front of you or if you want to look more into it, these are our nutrition standards. It's the lunch meal pattern. And the top section really goes over those 5 food groups. The bottom section, which is in the white section, is under really more of those micro and macronutrients. It's looking at calories, it's looking at saturated fat, trans fat, and sodium. So on top of the food group components that we have to have represented, we also have to make sure our menus are planned in a balanced way so that we can meet the standards for calories and fat for the appropriate grade groups that we're serving. So in Beloit, we follow the K-8 guidelines and then the 9-12 guidelines because our intermediates are that 4 through 8 grade. So we follow the patterns for K-8 and for 9-12. So just using the fruit as an example, the top line, you'll see at lunch, there's also broken down into weekly and daily minimums. So every day at lunch, we have to offer as minimum a 1/2 cup of fruit. And for the week, that would be 2.5 cups. And then if you look at 9 through 12, you see daily, we have to offer a minimum of 1 cup of fruit, and weekly, that would be 5 cups. It's kind of how you read the chart. And then under the vegetables, you'll even see we have subcategories to meet. So it's not just any vegetables, it's dark green leafy vegetables, red orange vegetables, beans and peas or legumes, starchy vegetables, and then other. And the other category is things like cucumbers and celery, things that don't fit into the other ones. For grains, all of the grains have to be whole grain rich. And then we have the meat alternates. So a meat alternate would be an egg product or peanut butter. We have veggie patties, veggie burgers that we offer too. So there's different vegetarian options. So that's why it's called meat alternate. And you can see the daily and the weekly minimums that we have to offer there. And then same with the fluid cups, fluid milk cups, which is just a cup where you see those little half pints that we offer every day. So we actually have an example of 2 school lunches. We wanted to bring one from the elementary and one from the high school level, just to show you. We can put a picture on a slide, but it's just a lot easier to see that this food came from Beloit, from the high school that we just brought over here. And then I'm going to grab this. So at the high school, we are offering our lunches on the trays, but at the elementary level, we are still using these closable bento boxes. So elementary and intermediate, we're using these kind of closable boxes. So all the product can go in here, and then it's closed, and handed to the students that way. So we started this during the pandemic, so that we wouldn't have to wrap each individual component separately. Since then, the rules have been revised, but we are still serving it. It just makes for a faster service. So, may I hand this to you? Thanks. Okay. So that's the lunch meal pattern. The next slide is breakfast. So breakfast is similar in how this is set up. At breakfast, the required food groups are fruit, grain, and milk, but we can serve vegetables, and you'll read there we can substitute vegetables for fruit. So if we want to serve spinach and potatoes in a frittata that we want to offer, we can count that as the fruit component if we want to. And then same thing with meat alternate. If we want to serve, instead of a whole bagel, we want to serve a half a bagel with a yogurt parfait, we can do that as well. So it's just how you menu plan. But you'll see the min and max of calories that we have, the saturated fat, sodium, and trans fat standards as well. Okay, smart snacks in schools. This is a la carte standards, so you can go to the next slide. A la carte foods. So the smart snacks final rule finalized science-based nutrition guidelines for competitive foods sold on the school campus during the school day. It's a very specific way. So competitive foods actually means competitive to the lunch program. So competitive to the national school lunch program, the federal school lunch program. So this is something you sell to students during the day that they can eat. So there are rules and standards around what you can sell to students when they're in school during the school day on school campus. The school day starts at midnight and goes until 30 minutes after school. So this doesn't impact what you can sell at a football game or what you can do as a fundraiser after school hours. It's just during school hours. Foods and beverages sold in schools must meet the general standards and the nutrient standards outlined in the final rule, and if they don't qualify for an exemption. So there are student groups that can apply for an exemption and do a fundraiser, and there's standards around that. And then the next slide, this is also an eye chart up on this screen, but the standards there's separate ones for food and beverage. Really, the takeaway for the food standards of what can be sold to a student during the school day, it has to be a whole grain rich product, or it has to have a fruit, vegetable, dairy, or protein food as the first ingredient. So it has to be whole grain rich, or it has to be fruit, vegetable, a protein product, or dairy, or a combination with at least a quarter cup of fruits and vegetables. The takeaway here is that it has to be real food. Right? And It has to be a food group or be a whole grain rich product. And then the nutrient standards, there's calorie standards, there's fat, saturated fat and trans fat, and then there's also sodium and sugar requirements or maximums that have to be met as well. And then the beverages, same thing. There's actually by grade group, elementary, middle school, and high school, different standards for what can be served. And none of this existed. The final rule that was referenced in the previous slide went into effect in 2014. So this is still somewhat recent. Okay. USDA foods or commodities. I'm going to touch briefly on this one. Really, the takeaway here is that school meals support U.S. farmers. So all of our food is under the Buy American clause. It's 100% American, and we do our very best to source as much local as we possibly can. So our milk is local. We get cheese local from Wisconsin. We have apples and other produce when it's in season available to us local, which is awesome. And it's distributed. Commodities are basically awarded to the district and then distributed through the food program. So they're credited, purchased through direct appropriations from Congress, and then surplus removal and price support activities. It's basically a discounted way to get food into the schools, which is great because it supports U.S. farmers. So, and it contributes about 15 to 20% of the products that we serve at lunch. Okay, community eligibility provision, or what we call CEP. And this is a 4-year reimbursement option for eligible local schools participating in the school lunch and breakfast programs that wish to offer free meals to all children in high poverty schools without collecting household meal applications. Eligibility is based on schools, groups of schools, or districts with an identified student percentage, or an ISP, of at least 40%. So as you can see in the box there, what is an ISP, or an identified student percentage? These are matched actually electronically through our direct certification through the state. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see what Beloit's percentage is. It's 62.52% is our identified student. So that is our, we are actually in year 4 of the application, which means we'll have to renew this summer. So we will need to complete another 4-year application. And the district ISP is 62.52%. And there are many USDA pandemic waivers right now for schools to serve meals at no charge, but even pre-COVID, we were serving free meals in Beloit. Okay, and then contracting with a food service management company, or FSMC. So full disclosure, I work for Aramark. I am a registered dietitian. I'm also, as Dawn introduced me, I'm the district manager for Aramark. And then we have our food service director and additional support here as well. But we, contracting with a food service management company still follows the established procurement regulations. So there is an RFP required. It's prepared by the school district. It's approved by the DPI and then released for vendors to bid. The timelines allow for site visits, for Q&As, for presentations. We submit sealed bids, and then they're publicly opened. And then it's reviewed by a committee with published criteria and evaluated against a matrix. And then it's presented to the Board of Education for approval. Contracts are awarded generally on a 5-year cycle with 1-year contracts and up to 4 renewals. And then, so who's on your food service team locally? So Joanne Armstrong is the Executive Director of Business, HR, and Operations. Dawn Smith, Director of Food and Nutrition. Both Joanne and Dawn are on the district team. And then we have Tim Butts, Food Service Director. Holly Goodwin, who's not here tonight, but she's our Food Service Manager. Jeb Werner is our Executive Chef. Mary Clark is our Production Manager. And then I have myself on here as District Manager as well. Paul, sorry I didn't get your picture before putting it in here. So that's who's on your food service team locally. And then what are we doing to promote school meals? Because the takeaway here is that we're, if you understand the program, that's wonderful, but you have hired us to promote school meals and to really drive that participation level. So on this screen, you'll see some of our marketing materials. So we have, Better Bites or Beyond Bites? I'm trying to think of the name now, but that supports this. So the first one, it says like, listen for new sounds, crunch, and it's a piece of broccoli. It's meant for elementary school students. But we have even beyond nutrition marketing materials as well, like the take charge of your responsibilities, do things on time, and put in your best effort. So those are some of our Beyond Bites communication messaging. But we'll hang these up in the cafeteria for a short amount of time, and then we switch them out each month. And then this is also kind of an eyesore because there's lots of pictures on here, but I just wanted to kind of capture some of the things we're doing to promote school meals here in Beloit. So this is the Mediterranean Grain Bowl you see as a special event promotion, which is a limited time offering for us. We celebrate national food days like National Vegetarian Day. We are starting a partnership with the Blender Cafe at the library. Student Viewpoint survey, this was done a few years ago. So the last time we did it was right before March of 2020. And we'll be instituting it again this coming spring, but it's a student survey. So they can scan a QR code and take a survey, and we get live feedback results, which is so valuable to us so we can make sure we're menuing what the students want to eat. You can see the 2 food trucks, the Lunchbox and the Cruisin' Cuisine. NutriSlice is an app that we have. You can access it from the website, or you can download it in the App Store. It shows all of our menus. If you have an allergy to fish, you can check a box and it crosses everything off our menu that has fish in it, so you can see exactly what you can eat. You can build a tray on there, so if you're a diabetic and you need to know what your carb count is, you can select exactly what you're having, and it'll give you the nutrition label and all the ingredients. Fork Farms is actually the hydroponic gardens that we're using to grow lettuce in the district. I have a yard sign out there that we had during some of the meal pack handouts that we did when the school district was shut down. We continued to stay open and serve the community curbside at numerous locations across the district over the last 2 years. And that was one of the yard signs that we had to kind of indicate where we were located. And then at the bottom, you'll see some of our participation. So really, over the last few years, I took out 19, 20, and 20 and 21 just because there was a lot of noise in there because of our curbside meal service compared to the normal meal service, but everything else held constant. Meal participation is between 63 and 67% over the last few years, and lunch participation has grown to 87% this year. And this is my last slide. We have had a successful partnership for 23 years, the district. So thank you for your partnership, and thank you for letting me speak again tonight. If you have any questions, I can take those now.
Thank you for the presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
For action item, we have a telephone systems upgrade. And this is our first hearing tonight of this item, as we've done in the committee. So are you seeking a recommendation, or are we hearing tonight and then approving at the next meeting? Okay.
Correct.
Joe, I apologize. This is Joanne. I'm sorry I was not able to join you unexpectedly this evening, so you're stuck with this virtual version of me. I do have representatives, Brian and Dave from Telcom Fitness, in case they have some technical questions that you guys would like to have answered. But basically, we went out to bid with an RFP for a new telephone system, as we have been struggling with our current district telephone service due to the limited capabilities and it being an outdated, antiquated system that we can't get support for. In fact, at this point, we have to buy replacement phones off of eBay because we cannot buy phones anywhere else. They don't manufacture them that support our system platform. So we wanted to take some bids out, figure out what we needed, what would be looking at for system capabilities, and really increase the ability to offer telephone services that would work with our current community and staff and families, which meant including options of telephone service through what's called soft phones, which allows them to make phone calls from their computer. So if a teacher is trying to contact families, being able to do that from their laptop computer and get those messages. That was one of the options, being able to have voicemail come to your email address and not having to be physically on the phone. I apologize. My dogs went crazy. Trying to really make our transition of our telephone service more dynamic to help our families and our staff. So after we went out to bid, we got multiple proposals back, and we narrowed the field to 2 products. One was a Mitel Connect product offered by CCCP, which is a camera corner connecting group. And then we had another option with the Cisco network, which was offered by Presidio. Telcom Fitness went through, they arranged for us to have in-district presentations in which we were able to touch and feel all of the actual telephones, see demonstrations of the service and the capabilities, talk to the vendors. And to those meetings, we invited building administrators, secretarial support, some teachers, district staff from the admin center, basically anybody who's going to be using those phones and those services to be able to take a look at it, and then solicited their feedback. After that feedback was received, Telcom Fitness went back out to the vendors and said, we want your best and final offers now. Now we know exactly what we want, and what can you come up with for us? After that recommendation, which was included in the board docs packet, the decision was to come recommending the camera corner connections, Mitel Connect telephone system upgrade. It's a 5-year proposal for a total of the 5 years of $609,000. And that is about $121,000 per year. There's going to be an upfront cost with the telephones, and then just that maintenance cost and continuing support. But that does include the installation, the support, new phones for all staff, Bluetooth headsets for office staff, and switchboard expanded phones for each building's main office, which would allow them to have better capabilities of managing main lines at our schools in the offices and the district reception area. So at this point, that is the recommendation that we're asking for consideration. This was accounted for in our technology budget, and they have made adjustments within their existing budget to be able to account for the cost of this, and it will be built in for those reoccurring costs in the future years. Well, are there any questions?
Any questions? All right. So this is information because it's their first presentation. I don't have any questions now, so we'll take it, and then next month we'll look to take action on this. Thank you.
Can I make one request that if anyone has questions come up before the next hearing, if they could let us know so that I can make sure that Telcom Fitness is able to assist in any types of questions they would have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Our next meeting date is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. As we do in our committees, the action items that come up at their first hearing, we hear them as a report. As Ms. Armstrong said, if there are questions, I'll make that made aware to the other board members tonight when I report out the work that was done in the committee, that they should be forwarded to her so she can answer them, or that we on the committee can ask them in the committee meeting. And then this item, telephone system upgrade, will come up again, and hopefully we'll take action on that. And then if it's approved, it'll go to the full board. So our next meeting, Tuesday, February 1st, 2022 at 5:30 PM. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second, been moved and seconded. This meeting is adjourned.
Who is the SRO at the high school?
All right. All right, it is 6:30, and at this time, I'd like to call our Human Resources Committee of the Whole to order. At this time, could we please get a roll call?
Yes, you may. All right. Megan Miller,
Present?
Spencer Anderson, and I think he's absent tonight. Amy Levy,
Here.
Sean Levy,
Present.
Joyce Ruff,
Present.
Greg Schneider,
Present.
Allison Simro.
Present.
The roll reflects that all members are present except Spencer.
Thank you very much. At this time, would anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Schneider, second by Ruff. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, it looks like motion passes unanimously. All right, at this time, would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes from December 14th?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Schneider, second by Ruff. Any discussion?
I actually have two edits. The first is under number 2, action information B. I'm not listed as voting aye for that motion. If I could be added, please. And then under that, it says motion to approve the security position, which makes it sound like we're approving a new position, which isn't what happened. I suggest that we include motion to approve the resignation of the security guard at Aldridge as listed in Exhibit A. I think that accurately reflects what happened.
Thank you very much for that, Board Member Levy. Does anybody have any thoughts or discussion on her edits? All right, hearing none, are we okay? So we have a motion on the table to approve the minutes. Should we vote that down in favor of a motion to approve the minutes with as amended? What do you think, Parliamentarian Levy?
Technically not yet. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we're gonna, if everybody is okay with the edits that Board Member Levy suggested, we should, so we'll go into make a new motion. So all in favor of the motion on the table, please say aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
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 Nay. Thank you. Okay, so motion fails. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Levy, second by Schneider. Any other discussion at this time? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Great. Motion passes unanimously. Let's see. Close that. Awesome. Okay, that takes us to item 2, employment recommendations. A motion may be made to convene the Human Resources Committee into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C of the Wisconsin State Statutes relative to considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. Would anybody like to make that motion at this time?
So moved.
We have a motion by Levy, second by Ruff. At this time, could we please get a roll call vote, Ms. Dooley?
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Megan Miller,
Aye.
Sean Levy,
Aye.
Joyce Ruff, Greg Snyder,
Aye.
Allison Simmerl.
Aye.
Motion is unanimous.
Thank you. So motion passes unanimously. At this time, the Committee of the Whole will step into closed session. When we return, we will handle all open session business regarding Exhibits A and B. Thank you. All right, is everybody ready to resume open session? Excellent. It is 6:46 and we are now back from closed session in our Human Resources Committee of the Whole. That takes us to item 2B, which is consideration of employment recommendations exhibits A and B. Do any board members have any questions regarding exhibits A or B for open session?
I just have one question with A. For the high school secretary, is that in the counseling office?
No, that is the front office for one of the secretaries that resigned.
Okay, thank you. And then B, I don't know if Dr. Keiser wanted to speak first before we discuss B.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. So people may notice on Exhibit B that the music addendums have been added to this list. Many of these individuals would not be listed because they have received addendums in the past. Only typically new issuances of addendums would be listed on here. However, I felt it important because there had been so much conversation in the community and with the board and administration around the music addendums and how the shift from paying by addendums to paying by time cards had created. That became a distraction to the work that needed to get done. So I emailed the principals and shared with them that I was making the decision to move back to the addendums, and in line with the expressed intent of the addendums to pay for work outside of what was in their contract. If there were any time cards that were issued or filled out between that, that's where the comment is. We're issuing the full addendums for the work. And if there are any time cards, those will be subtracted from that addendum so that the total amount of the addendum is the total amount. So if someone did time card work, they don't get in addition to that full addendum, they'll get the full addendum amount as their net addendum. I will be meeting with the building administrators, just to review expectations and in ahead of the next staffing cycle, which will be starting up here within the next couple of months, so that if there are any changes that want to be made, we'll come up with a better plan of communication and hopefully avoid the distractions that this has caused this year.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Dr. Keyser. The board definitely appreciates your responsiveness to this concern. Do board members have questions at this time?
Just a couple, well, actually one processing question. So it says that full addendum minus previously paid time cards. So if a person was using a time card, is that separate from receiving an addendum? Or they were receiving their addendum through the time card process, i.e. on their biweekly check?
So the time card process was one in which was to honor the work that was being done, because the concern was that not every addendum was being paid out, but not everyone was completing all the work that was expected of the addendum. So the shift to time cards was one to say, if you did all of the work that was expected, you would have gotten the addendum amount. If you chose not to do, say, a parade or something like that, so you didn't do all that work, you would have gotten less of an amount. But the amount was going to be at least the same. The reason why we put the time card in there was, let's say it was $2,000 and they did $100 worth of work. They still get the $2,000. They'll get the $100 that they had on the time card plus $1,900 for the addendum to get the full addendum amount. That was the reason for the comment.
So I guess, but let me rephrase my question. With the time, okay, so with the addendum, I do the work and I get paid after my season is over, correct? But with the time card, are they getting paid as they submit the time cards on their biweekly check? Or are they submitting all of their time cards and then they get paid at the end?
No, they would, with the time cards, you'd get them as you submit them. And with the way that addendums work in this particular case, we would issue them as part of their contracted time. So it would be built in as an additional payment onto their biweekly paycheck. So it's not until the end of the year, it would be ongoing. So it would not have changed how they got paid, other than the mechanism by which they would have had to fill out a time card as opposed to just having this addendum.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, no one has been anyone who submitted a time card has not been paid for the time cards they have submitted, because the season, so to speak, has not ended, correct?
No, they have been, any time cards that have been submitted would have been paid. Yes, they would have been paid. They do not, unlike a sports season, which gets paid at the end, this gets paid as part of their paycheck.
Perfect. So now that they're back to the addendum and off of the time card, let's say I have $1,000 left. Do I need to wait until the end and get paid as a traditional addendum?
No.
You're shaking your head no.
No, they would
Okay.
not. They would get paid as part of their regular paycheck. So we would take the remainder of their addendum, let's say that $1,000 left, and divide up amongst the remainder of the paychecks.
Perfect. So my other question, did we lose any music instructor participation because of this situation, or did everyone, are they back on board?
Yes, they're back on board.
Okay. And then my other question, separate from this issue, I noticed that the matrix and the addendums were scanned in for this meeting. It wasn't the original document. So I just wanted to confirm that no adjustments have been made to either.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you so much.
No, they haven't been made. My staff scanned them in because I wasn't in the office when they needed to be uploaded.
Perfect. Thank you for that confirmation.
Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you, Dr. Keyser, for the great information. Anybody else have any questions? comments? All right, great questions. Does anybody else have anything for exhibits A or B at this time? Hearing none, would anybody like to make a motion to approve exhibit A, exhibit B, or both?
I move approval of employee recommendations for Exhibit A and B.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Levy and a second by Schneider for approval of employment recommendation exhibits A and B. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. And that takes us to item 3A, our next meeting date. The next time the Human Resource Committee of a Whole will meet is on Tuesday, January 18th at 6:30 p.m. Any other business before we adjourn? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Vice President Levy, second by Semrau. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, meeting is adjourned at 6:55 p.m. We will begin our regular board meeting here at 7 o'clock in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, it is 7 p.m. At this time, I'd like to call our regular business meeting to order. The Board of Education would like to let our families and viewers know that our regular board meetings are being simultaneously interpreted. You can watch the Spanish interpreted meeting through the link found at the board website under the Watch Meetings tab with tonight's date. In order to accommodate this interpretation, we will be monitoring the pace of our meeting to allow time for the interpretation, and I would like to remind our board members and others speaking to please speak one at a time. Thank you so much for your consideration and understanding. At this time, could we get a roll call, please, Ms. Dooley?
Yes, we may. Spencer Anderson. Okay, Amy Levy,
Here.
Sean Levy,
Present.
Megan Miller,
Present?
Joyce Ruff, Craig Snyder,
Present.
Allison Simmerl.
Present.
And the roll reflects that Spencer is absent.
Thank you very much. At this time, would anybody like to move approval of our agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Levy, second by Semrau. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Sorry about that. Oh, I gotcha. All right, any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. At this time, I'd like to invite Greg Schneider to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll all mute except for Board Member Schneider. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. All right, that takes us to item 2A, public comment. Are there people in the meeting here wishing to make a comment this evening? Excellent. So please remember to state your name and your address before you come up, and I'm just going to quick read our norms. Members of the public are welcome to attend at all open meetings of the Board of Education. Robert's Rules of Order will be followed at all times. Individuals attending board meetings are expected to conduct themselves in a respectful and courteous manner that models appropriate behavior for our students. Individuals wishing to comment are expected to comply with the following norms in order to maintain a respectful and ordered meeting and to prevent discussion of confidential matters in a public forum. Comments should be directed to members of the Board of Education and not district employees, students, or other members of the public in attendance at the meeting. Speech that is belligerent, disorderly, disruptive, repetitive, or which exceeds the allowable time permitted for each speaker is prohibited. Concerns regarding specific district personnel are not appropriate topics to be addressed during an open meeting comment period and should be handled in accordance with district policy and procedures. Concerns or questions regarding students are prohibited. Response from the board, if any, will be limited to clarifying inaccurate information, seeking additional information from the speaker, or acknowledging that the speaker has been understood. The board will not debate with an individual, and the board may not take action on an item raised during public comment that is not on the meeting notice or agenda. The chair will interrupt and rule an individual who violates any of these norms out of order. If ruled out of order by the chair, the individual's opportunity to address the board will end immediately and the microphone will be turned off. Thank you for your participation and courtesy. Would the first person like to speak?
Yes, we have Deb Fallon of 1232 Elm.
Thank you.
The button? Is that it? Okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Go on, Ms. Fallon. Sorry about that.
Okay, we'll try again. Deb Fallon, 1232 Elm Street. I'm here to talk about the Even Start program, and I know it's been addressed in the past, and I just want to bring it to the board's attention again, that it's a great program and it should take place at Brother Dutton School, not any place else. So how many of you have visited the Even Start program? or even know where it is. The former Brother Dutton School is the home of Even Start and has been for several years. The rent for the school classrooms, gym, offices, and kitchen is $30,000 per year and is all on one level. This is a program funded principally by Title I funds that is preparing adults and children in literacy skills. Most participants are learning English and its focus is family. In fact, one part of the program is family engagement, where nutrition classes as well as other skills are taught to the adults. Babies, toddlers, and pre-kinder with 3-year-olds are part of the program. 4-year-old students are part of the school system's 4K program. These young students will most likely participate in the Beloit school system and help our system's enrollment problems. It is essential that we support this program and leave it at Brother Dutton. Many of the families that participate live in the Hackett neighborhood and feel comfortable and safe at their present location. There are about 34 adults participating now, a little lower than before the pandemic, who need a place to park, and there is a large parking lot available off the street. This program is preparing for the future by growing families to be part of our district. Therefore, I would like to see support for this program by leaving it at Brother Dutton, where there's plenty of parking off-street and good facilities on one level for the participants. By visiting the school to see what is happening and recognizing the work being accomplished. Paying the rent needed so little for a successful program that supports family engagement. Hiring the personnel that is needed, especially paraprofessionals, to help staff classroom with babies and toddlers so that we follow state guidelines. If so, you will be helping support a needed educational program and a real plus for our system. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you so much. We appreciate you being here this evening.
You can press the button. Thank you.
Great. Is there another comment for this evening?
Yes, we also have Susan Adams
Thank you very much.
of 703 Milwaukee Road.
I'm so sorry, Miss Adams.
Okay.
Sorry. No,
Now, is it on again?
sorry. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Miss Adams. Thank you.
I'm Susan Adams, and I live at 703 Milwaukee Road. I echo what Deb Fallon has said. I'm here with major concerns about Even Start. It's a Title I program, as she said, with Blackhawk Technical College, similar to Head Start, but with the added component of the teachers teaching parents English literacy. Even Start's by far the most comprehensive program for learning English, offering instruction 5 mornings a week for 15 hours total, as opposed to 2 3-hour classes a week at either Blackhawk or State Line. I've taught or substituted in all 3 places, and it's just much better with that system. Unfortunately, I think many people don't know about it, except for maybe the Even Start dancers, and I hear that even that program is now unsure. So I would say my 3 issues would be moving and parking, which Deb covered very well. I think Brother Dutton is an excellent place to put it, and it's been there for over 10 years, and they haven't raised the rent. I think that's wonderful. It might save some money in the district, some money in the short term, but if you go to a place that doesn't have parking, then it'll die. And it needs, I would say, 8 classrooms. We had 4 for adults and then 4 for children when I have been there, and I think now might dip down to 3. The lack of recruitment, I think, is part of the problem. She mentioned paraprofessional support. I echo that. They often use parents to volunteer. Okay, and publicity recruiting. That's a problem, a big one.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Do we have another public comment this evening? All right, well, we certainly appreciate your public comments and for all of those who are here joining us this evening. Let me take a look. So that takes us next then to item 3A, the Superintendent Board Report. Dr. Kieser?
Thank you, Board President Miller. So tonight for the Superintendent's Board Report, we started this conversation through the Budget and Operations Committee and brought it to the full board in terms of establishing some board priorities around the budget. And now we're continuing the conversation tonight to establish the priorities and planning for the future. I will have as my last slide some next steps and a request in terms of some direction from the board in terms of where we should take the conversations from here. To just kind of reground ourselves in where we are in the budgeting process, through a month of conversations, we established the board's budget priorities, and these are listed here. We put some headers to them so that these weren't individual items, but part of a larger piece that then we can put into our Baird forecasting model so that we could put some numbers next to these and see how these would play out in different budgeting models and where that would impact the district, not just next year, but in years to come. Just in terms of the pieces here, we did not put a priority order to this, so this is in the order that we had talked about them before. So I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a priority list in here. It was just the list that was created. Moving from that, I wanted to give the board and the community at large a brief insight. We're not going to dive into the detail or depth that even Ms. LaPointe, who gives monthly budget updates to the board committee and then subsequently the board. But this is going to be what I would consider a 100,000-foot view. Our overall budget for the district is a little over $100 million budget. Of that $102 million budget, $65 million of that budget is dedicated to our salaries and benefits. Those things that fall in salaries and benefits, as you can see here, are not just salaries and insurance, but we also talk about the Wisconsin retirement system, the different types of supports in terms of health insurance, so our health savings accounts, the money that goes into those health savings accounts from the district to support that self-insured, but then also things such as whenever we hire, we pay for the pre-employment physicals and drug testing. We also have, for our administrators as part of their contract, tuition reimbursement. And then there are other smaller ancillary employment benefits and memberships that are within that $65 million. On the flip side is the operational side. So if salaries and benefits is $65 million, or about 64% of the budget, the rest of it is in operations, which sometimes gets overgeneralized to say, hey, this is what we assign to building allocations, department budgets, and so forth. But under operations, we pay for all of our utilities. We pay for our contracted services, such as Airmark, and we heard from food service tonight in our committee meeting, but our technology and TC networks. We also pay for all the open enrollment. So in our discussion in improving the budget, when we talked about the impact that a charter school had, that goes into that line item, that open enrollment, that we put into our operational line item. Transportation, district insurance, so this is our insurance for liability and so forth, different from health insurance. Our special education transfers, so the money that we take from Fund 10 to go to Fund 27 for special education, that is part of our operations. And all the way at the bottom is the allocations that we submit to buildings and departments for them to run their buildings. So the color coding here is in the middle. As you can see, we think as fixed costs are actually pretty variable. There are only a few things that are fixed. So when we contract with our partners, such as Airmark, Durham, TC Networks, and so forth, once we set those contracted rates, we know pretty much what those are, and we can count on them throughout the year and then from year to year. But many of the costs, indeed most of the costs that you see in there, are variable. They're based on factors such as the number of staff that we have employed, the number of students we have in our enrollment, and the types of offerings that we have. You know, the type of insurance we have, whether it's family or single or self-insured, fully insured. Those things are all variable. So as much as we want to account for those costs, there is some variability in there. And then finally, there is really only one true area where we have a lot of discretion, and that is, at the end of the day, how much we allocate to each of our building administrators as operational costs for their building, and to each of the departments for them to operate their departments. So those are things such as buying curricular resource materials, sending staff to PDs, purchasing contracted services at building levels or by departments for things like PD and so forth. Those are the allocation pieces. So when we think about that large $102 million, it's really a much smaller piece of that pie that we're really talking about as discretionary. So when we think about that from a 100,000-foot view, we really have to take a look at a different set of lenses when we talk about budgeting in terms of revenues and expenditures. When we think about the role that we have as a board and administrative team, controlling revenues from the administrative side, we can control revenues by writing grants and look for one-time opportunities. But really, the idea of controlling revenue by increasing revenue authority doesn't come from administration. It really doesn't even come from the board. It really comes from our community. But the idea of asking the community for additional revenue authority only comes through a referendum question, which the board has as one of its several roles and responsibilities. On the flip side, when we talk about expenditures and controlling expenditures, that most of it comes through the administration, and then in some areas, depending on policy, comes to the board for formal review and votes. So when we look at controlling expenditures, we're thinking about things such as how much do we actually allocate to our buildings and our departments? What are the cost of living increases at each level? How much do we, of that $102 million, do we move over into salary and benefits versus operations? What are our open positions and how we fill those? And then what are the benefit options? So those all are, when we look at those things, those are the things that we talk about when we talk about controlling expenditures. But then there are the expenditures that are on the staffing side, such as when we look at how we staff our buildings. Currently, we go through a process right now. The buildings at the secondary level, so intermediate and high schools, are going through a review of course selections for our students. Those students will select courses. In turn, those selected courses will determine how many of those sections of those courses need to be run, and then how many staff need to be hired to run those courses. When we take a look at our staffing levels, and I did not include this slide, but I have included it in the past, if you go to the Department of Public Instruction and you look at our enrollments and you look at our staffing levels have remained relatively consistent for the past 5 years, although we've had decline enrollment. So we've had a situation in which we've supported keeping stable staffing levels, even though we've had declining enrollment, which has had the effect of having lower class sizes. Those are the things that we need to be looking at when we talk about controlling expenditures, as well as the utilization of all of our facilities. And then last, but certainly not least, looking at the open contracts we do have for our services and asking them, are we able to support the same level of services that we've contracted as in the past? So as we start this conversation, we get further and further down that road, and I know the board has asked, they want to see kind of a 360 view of what we have to offer. These are the areas in which we're going to be presenting to the board. However, some of these we really can't explore unless the board really wants to take a close, hard look at certain areas, such as the revenue side of the conversation. If we do absolutely nothing, this again is a 100,000-foot view. Using our Baird forecasting tool, we projected, or we approved a budget of with a $10 million shortfall, keeping everything the same, and I mean down to everything, including student enrollment. The cost of living increases to the expenditure side moved that budget shortfall from 10 million to 12 million for next year and 14 million for the year after that. That's controlling and assuming everything, including student enrollment, stays exactly the same. So as we start to have the conversations and I ask for the board's direction as to which way we want to go, we know that we're not going to be able to solve and balance the budget simply by living in one area or the other, but it's how much we want to explore in one area or the other that's going to determine the type of actions the administration has to take. So when we take a look at the forecasting tool, just as a snapshot, some of you might have had a picture in your mind that the forecasting tool was something that was a nice, clean website where we could say, we have 900 staff. What happens if we go to 905 staff or 895 staff? All of a sudden, all of those numbers change. Well, they do, but it isn't as simple as having some TurboTax. Exactly. It is a very complex spreadsheet that, as you can see, we put in a lot of the variables, and this is just the revenue side, and this is what the expense side looks like. And then the columns that are in yellow are the forecasting side. So as we input our numbers for what we're currently doing this year, and all of the numbers that we pull in from Baird as far as what the projections are moving forward, we can make some determinations. So yes, we can say we have 900 staff. What would our budget look like if we had added 5 more staff or took away 5 more staff? We can do that, but it's not as glamorous as TurboTax appears to be. So I want to manage expectations as much as inform the board and the community as to the depth and the work that we're asking Ms. LaPointe and Ms. Armstrong to present to the board. It is an involved, complex process, and as we make those tweaks, we have to go into this tool and make not just one adjustment, but a couple of adjustments. So tonight, what I'm really asking for from the board is, how do we want to structure the future board workshops? We typically continue these conversations at the committee level and then filter them up to the full board, but we could bring these conversations straight to the full board for quicker action. I do want to let you know that some things that are already in the pipeline that we will bring to the board is some through committee and some directly to the board is the facility master planning team, which has been in RFP, will be coming through committee, and this will be a way for us to assess the current state of our facilities, how much it would cost to keep those facilities, maintain those facilities, and what is recommended for upkeep in those facilities. And then, so that's due at the end of January and will come through the next committee meeting in February. And by the end of February, I've started to work with the executive team, and we'll be working with the administrative team to come up with a brainstorming list of controlling expenditure side items, so budget reduction items that then give the board an idea of, here are some of our ideas that we're bringing forward, so that we can have a clearer conversation in terms of what does controlling expenditures really look like when we're trying to spend a lot of our time and effort controlling the expenditure side as opposed to looking at the revenue side. Now on the flip side, by the end of March, if the board is contemplating looking at referendums, the board needs to really make a determination how deep they want to go down that road, because based on the Baird presentation that we had earlier this year, the November 2022 election cycle, if the board was ever to contemplate a referendum at that time, a decision would have to be made in the form of a question no later than August of 2022. And mind you, that conversation takes about a year at the board level to explore, plan, get feedback from the community, formulate a question, and then put that question out there. So the likely conversation, if the board was looking at the revenue side of things, would be the April 23 election at the earliest, which would mean that the board would have to make a decision on a question no later than the end of January of 2023, which gives us just about that 1 year time frame to do all of the work that would be needed to have that conversation. So, questions?
All right, actually, Board Member Levy had a quick clarification, and then, yeah.
Go for it.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, if we were interested in going to referendum for April of 22, I'm assuming or April of 23, that would be January of 22? It wouldn't be the January of the same year, correct?
It would be January of the same year, so the question has to be at least 70 days ahead of the actual election date. So
But the work to formulate that question, I would assume, would begin January of 2022, which is this month?
no.
Because you said the process takes about a year with community feedback, et cetera.
So getting all that feedback and determining whether or not the community would support a referendum question would take about a year. The question doesn't have to be approved by the board until 70 days prior to that election date. So that's January 2023 is the date in which the board would have to approve the question.
But the work would start right now if that's something we're interested in.
Correct, at the earliest, yes.
Thank you. That's a great clarification, and I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, board members, does anybody have a question or a comment for Dr. Keyser on his presentation at this time?
I have a question.
Go ahead, please, Vice President Levy.
So looking at if the question is formed in January 2023 and earliest going to the April election, if that didn't pass, same question or a revised question again coming up in November 2023?
Correct. So if there was yes, kind of, and if the board wanted to explore more, I would invite Baird to come back and do a presentation on referendums. One, to educate through the nuances of that, because there are multiple types of referendum questions that could be asked. But my understanding, yes, if an April 23 referendum failed, you have until August of 23 for the November of 23 ballot.
And this also involve like work with school perceptions, survey your community, and understand the level of support for the question that's out there that's being considered.
Correct. So when I talk about the work that the board would need to do, that would include the school perceptions, any community engagement, any of the work as far as formulating facility plan, utilization, any other budgetary expenditure controls that the board would want to put in place, yes.
It looks like Ms. Armstrong had a comment as well. Ms. Armstrong, if you want to go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about this, and I know Dr. Keiser did an excellent job, and I appreciate him being able to have that thorough information about the time. Want to make sure everyone is clear in that even on that November 22nd, if that was an option, these would only be funds for the 22-23 school year. So we do not have any options of increasing or controlling our revenue for the 22-23 school year coming up. And that's why we need to focus on the controlling expenditures for next year, because if the board was to make a decision to start pursuing additional revenue sources or referendum, none of those could be used for the 22-23 school year in which we're looking at right now. That's more of our long-term planning. So I just wanted to make sure that the board and everyone understood that this option isn't necessarily on the table. The work has to be done during that year, but those funding sources would not be available for next year.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. That was a bullet point I missed.
So much gratitude for you. Sorry to interrupt. Yes, thank you very much for that. Awesome. Great. Who else has questions and comments at this time?
I would just say that my two comments is that I'm in favor for this being a full board workshop. I wouldn't want it to be segmented and then you all get the ball rolling and it comes back to the full board and there's a different opinion. Don't want to waste time. And I would love to see a presentation from Baird as soon as possible, because it sounds like if we are interested in even entertaining a question development for January 2023, that work needs to start like tomorrow.
Will do. Ms. Armstrong and I will reach out to Baird, and I know Lisa would be happy to come back and provide that presentation.
Any other comments or questions from board members at this time?
Just a question on the, by the end of February, determine 22-23 budget reduction items. What does that process look like?
So the process really is in terms of, one, presenting a very similar slide deck that I shared tonight with the administration. I had already informed the administration that we were having these conversations at the board level and that I would be seeking their input in terms of their thoughts around budgets. Ultimately, as I had shared earlier, there are only certain knobs that we can tweak and turn. And some of those are things that take care of themselves through the natural course of course selections and doing the staffing plan, but others are are explicit and decisions that have to be made, both at the building level and at the district level. So gathering input, seeing what people's ideas are, realizing what kinds of efficiencies we can create to avoid other decisions being made, and then ultimately making sure that everyone across our system is fully informed as to here's the list that we're bringing forward to the board. if the board wants to, I would be interested in knowing if the board would want to act on a list, or if they would prefer to say, here is a list that would get us as close to a balanced budget as possible, and understand that those are going to be some tough decisions that I and the administrative team are going to have to make. But I've operated in both environments as a director, so that's a question that I do have in terms of, we'll bring in February some items. That will be a list of the brainstorming ideas that I've gathered from the buildings and departments over the next month and a half. But then if the board is interested in going through those and making determinations of stay away from here, or I have concerns about this, we can go that route. Otherwise, my intent is to bring forward a list of recommendations that would get us as close to a balanced budget as possible.
So in that process of, in February, we're making decisions about the budget for 22-23, which will actually come to us in October. The strategic plan will be done in July, so our planning will kind of have set our priorities, but where we're at in the process is the strategic plan's not done, so we haven't set like spending priorities yet, but we're going to start making decisions in February to guide in that space.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, with the strategic planning process, that's going to take us through the spring. There are statutory timelines that affect certain things that we want to make sure that we don't miss. And that's why I would say by the end of February, that is on the cusp of the beginning of the staffing plan cycle and the hiring cycle. So if there are determinations that need to be made, we want to make sure that we don't get past deadlines, but we also don't want to feel like it's a rush process and that people have a chance to ask their questions and get answers to those questions before decisions get made.
Great questions. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Keyser? Okay, I have several. Oh, are you sure? No, please go ahead. You're formulating? Okay, just want to make sure I don't cut anybody off. All right, a couple of things I just wanted to clarify. I was looking through our budget in preparation for a meeting this evening, and I just wanted to clarify, and this might be more of a Joanne question, but I just wanted to affirm, so like our $10 million deficit budget, when I was looking through our numbers, I noticed that we had like a $9,700,000 and change bill where we pay ourselves from the general fund to cover special education. Is that correct?
That might be a little bit low, but yes.
I'm
Say that,
so sorry,
Joanne?
Ms. Armstrong.
I'm sorry, yes, the interfund transfer, it's usually about $9 million that we spend over to special ed to balance their fund.
Perfect, thanks. And I wanted to raise that point because as we're considering the expenditure side of this and how we control expenditures, I just wanted to raise this issue to the board and to the community for people who are listening that, a lot of our budget deficit comes from making sure that we're providing needs and meeting needs for our most vulnerable students. And so for me, I think that's going to be a decision-making factor for me. So when we do come to that workshopping of that list, I want to make sure that that's something that we're still able to prioritize, even though it's like extremely costly. I know that that's a large expense. So that would just be like maybe a little feedback. Just that I wanted to share with my colleagues and this evening. The other thing I wanted to address is I've seen, while we're talking about controlling expenditure and revenue, I've seen a lot of confusion in the community about raising property taxes and things like that. And I just wanted to clarify, we did not raise the mill rate. Is that correct?
Correct. Our mill rate has stayed the same in terms of the price per thousand. That's on the tax form.
Perfect. Okay, so our mill rate has been consistent, has not raised for the last 2 years. We also, when you were talking earlier in your presentation about staffing, is it correct that we have about a 15-to-1 student to teacher ratio?
I would have to go back to DPI just to double check, but that's in the ballpark, yes.
Okay, yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that, and I think for reference, I did a little bit of homework before the meeting, like School District of Janesville has, and change around a 14-to-1, but it's like decimal points apart. So, I mean, so for everybody who's listening, just to get the context of when we're looking at expenditures, we're talking about staffing and things like that, I just wanted to kind of put that into some context, because I think that's important, which kind of segues into my next point. I'm curious, I know you talked about a board workshop. I agree with Board Member Levy. I am strongly in favor of a board workshop, a full board workshop. I'm curious, and we're talking about this later on in the agenda anyway with regard to community engagement. Would it be advisable at all to put together, after we've had a chance to kind of workshop through this, kind of like a road show so that people can understand in the community what these budget considerations are and get some of their feedback on, just to sort of take a temperature with the community about what are things on the expenditure side. I would be curious to hear from people, like, given that we value low class size, like we've consistently heard that from community members, given that, we've gotten a lot of, I've heard a lot of positive feedback about special education and things like that. I'd be curious to hear from the community, like what they're interested in on the expenditure side. Has that been a consideration for how we'd workshop through this?
It has not been a consideration outside of the public comment for board meetings, simply because the expenditure side is it has a lot of nuance to it. So to take the time and try to explain all the nuances around that, it would not, as we saw in just the board coming through its budget priority list, many of the items that are on there are adds to our budget. So if we want to prioritize just that list, we'll have to find offsets elsewhere in the budget, and we still have a $10 million budget deficit. If we want to close a $10 million budget deficit, what I really need is, do we want to commit to getting as close to a balanced budget each November or by the end of October? Are we comfortable with approving deficit budgets, but up to a certain range? Are we wanting to ensure that we keep certain things stabilized, and if we want to keep those stabilized and say those are untouchable, then that really forces the question that we have to then increase revenue somewhere else in order to make sure those things stay stable. Some things are statutorily driven. You mentioned special education. That fund transfer, even if it was $12 million, we have no choice. It has to be transferred from Fund 10 to Fund 27 to make it whole. That's a statutory requirement. So whether it's a priority or not a priority, it's something that is done regardless. So it is a priority by default with that. But to some of your other questions in terms of what do people want to not touch, it's really the board that says, these are the things that we are prioritizing, and to Vice President Levy's conversation, without the strategic planning process being done to kind of help set those in more solid cement than wet sand, it's really up to the board right now for next year. These are the things that we want to hold stable. So these are the areas that you can play within administration. Or it could be as blanket as saying, administration, we know you're going to have to make some really tough decisions because we have a $10 million budget deficit. Get as close to balanced as you can for the 22-23, and we're going to talk about whether or not we want to have a conversation about future budgets now.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the reason that I asked the question is because I understand it's extremely nuanced, and I think there are a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings. And so, like, I appreciate, for example, right now, how you took the time to explain how we have to pay that, like, those dollars for special education, which, like, of course we should, because those are our kids with large needs, and this is what we're here to do, right? And so I think I would be interested, and we can kick this, off till maybe we have our workshop, in finding some kind of mechanism to, like, start now to reach into the community to help educate around those decisions that we're considering making. Just because I think that, I think building understanding in this process, because it is going to be a very difficult year, it sounds like, I think is important for the community.
As I'm thinking about your conversation, one option that popped into my head from Vice President Levy's question earlier about referendum. Part of the board work in getting towards a referendum and exploring a potential referendum question could be controlling of expenditures. So that could be a mechanism by which the board does solicit community feedback in terms of, if we are looking at this, controlling revenue through a potential referendum, on the flip side of that, what are the things that the community feels passionate about as far as prioritizing within the budget process? So that may give the board some insight to your thoughts and ideas.
No, I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense, because I mean, I know we've talked before, and I'll just restate, since we're having the conversation now, that as we go through the strategic planning process, like when we're done, just like Vice President Levy just alluded to, our budget is going to be aligned to those strategic priorities. But since we don't have those strategic priorities currently set, I guess that's sort of what I'm searching for, is a way to begin to engage with our community and to make sure, while this is a board responsibility and a board decision, I want to make sure that we're building understanding as we make those decisions. So I appreciate the conversation. I know, Vice President Levy, you had other thoughts?
Yeah, well, part of that is like, our community has to understand our financial position and where we're at, because even, like I said, there are some foundational and fundamental pieces that we were trying to put in place, like the strategic plan, to guide and direct our spending as we set priorities. But we're at this space where we need to make some decisions in February to affect our budget for this October. We'll have new board members in April, possibly. So whatever decisions are made in February, there's possibility for change in April, because the budget will be approved in October. So one of the things that I'm thinking about in this process is, in February, which is weeks away, when we, you go through this process, you read the article however it's written, and then people are worried that this is getting cut, this person is losing a job, we're not gonna have this, we're not gonna have that. And then behind that, you have the 22-23 school year, which may be balanced, but everything's bare boned. And now, hey, let's spend in this priority. When people experience the 22-23 school year, which is significantly different, and then in April or November, these are the priorities we set. Help us fund these priorities so we can provide the education, the program of learning for our students that we feel they deserve. There's got to be some space in between there where we give that, because like you say, with the community input, people have to understand exactly where we're at and what we're dealing with. So that total picture, not just the next step, but the total picture. Sometimes when you're driving, if before the GPS days, you ask somebody to like navigate, and they tell you when to turn, but they got to tell you when to turn before the turn is coming, or that reaction. So, today is January. We make some decisions in February. We get ready to make some turns here, so we have to kind of discuss how that's going to go, so that long picture of the total plan is laid out.
Thank you for that. At this time, are there any, I know Dr. Keyser, you said that one of the steps that you were looking for this evening was to determine if a future board workshop or workshops are needed. Are you looking for consensus on that this evening?
I'm just, it doesn't have to be a board action. Board Member Levy threw out the idea of definitely, from her perspective, a full board workshop. I have not heard any other board members put in alternative to that, so I will take that as the direction unless there are other board members that have other ideas that want to go.
Thank you. Are there board members who with other ideas or who would like to weigh in on that?
I just think it's our responsibility to look at all possible options that are there. And looking at the workshop with Baird would be one of those things that's part of our responsibility. But just also a comment more for those listening and the public. We've talked about the amount of funds that are transferred out of our operating system into special ed funds and how that impacts our deficit. But just also a reminder that if the state and federal government upheld their promise when they passed special ed laws many years ago, this deficit would be cut in at least half, if not more. That most of the money that we're transferring from one fund to the other is meeting the state and federal government's responsibilities. And as they fail to do that, then the taxpayers in Beloit have to make up for that.
No, well said, Board Member Schneider. And I would also articulate that to the community that is listening, that through the budget conversations, and it's unfortunate that I've had to have these conversations in the past, it is normal and understandable that when you hear brainstorming ideas about controlling expenditures, whatever is listed, the feeling is that's what's going to happen. And if it isn't listed, then it's not going to happen. And the reality is just because it's listed doesn't guarantee that that's a recommendation that's going to happen. And just because something wasn't listed doesn't mean that it isn't something that ends up being done as part of the budgeting process. So as we go through the process, we're collecting input, but then ultimately the final decision has to be made by the administration and approved by the board through the budgeting process.
I think, thank you both for those excellent thoughts. I would like to just, lift up what you've both said. And, it is unfortunate that the state government puts a spending requirement on us without fulfilling their end of the reimbursement for our kids with the highest needs. But yeah, definitely we'll have to look at all options. I personally am in favor of a Baird and budget workshop as soon as possible. Is that pretty much where we're at? Thank you very much, Board Member Levy, for raising that point, and thank you so much for the thorough and informative presentation, Dr. Keyser. Are there any other thoughts? Please, go ahead.
Invite the school perceptions people also.
Will do.
Perfect. So we'll look forward. We'll get that scheduled and look forward to a meeting, a full board budget workshop with school perceptions, which just for those who are listening, that is a board self-evaluation kind of school board guidance entity, and Baird, which is financial service, to help us continue this discussion. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Yeah. President Miller, I was asking for,
Yep.
with school perceptions, in addition to that, they also survey communities when they're getting ready to ask for money, and they produce a very reliable feedback based off of your community's input about the level of support for what you're asking for.
Thank you so much for clarifying. And so, yes, thank you for that. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for the great discussion. And thank you, Dr. Keyser and Ms. Armstrong, for the great information. That takes us to item 4, committee and other board reports. Board Member Anderson is not here this evening to share Business Operations and Finance Committee. Is anybody else from? Go ahead.
So I serve as vice chair of the committee. Today, Board Member Ruff and I met. We did approve the financial report for November 2021. Received information on our food service, an overview of our program. And we received the first report for an action item of a telephone system upgrade. And as our practices and our committees, that was our first time hearing it, and it'll be voted on in the next committee meeting. And if it passes through the committee, it'll be brought to the full board at our next meeting.
Thank
That was
you.
the Business Operations Finance Committee meeting.
Do you want to go ahead and give us teaching, learning, equity, and people services?
See, that was in 2021, and I forgot all of that. No, we met December 14th. We had a presentation on the continuous improvement planning process. We also reviewed the achievement gap reduction biannual presentation, and we approved the environmental literature course for course selections at the high school.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Governance Committee has also not met since last year and will be meeting again later this month. The two main topics that we discussed, just as a reminder, were board self-evaluation and kind of establishing a cadence for when we do our own self-evaluation, what we do with that data, and how we continue to improve our governance to the benefit of our district, and also on the onboarding process for new board members. If anybody has thoughts on the presentation that's still attached there, we just sort of drafted out topic and content pieces. You can email me your thoughts on those, and I believe our next meeting is January 25th. Any questions for Vice President Levy or I at all? Anything? Great. Board Member Levy?
Okay, so the next legislative update will be presented at the January 18th regular board meeting. And my update for policy is we will meet tomorrow at 5 p.m., which is a shift from our regular 5:30. And we have 3 items on the agenda. That's Policy 377, Interscholastic Athletics and Activities, and Rules 1 and 2 of that policy.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Board Member Levy? All right, thank you so much for that. That takes us to Section 5, Action and Discussion Items. Item 5A is the 2020-2021 District Financial Audit Report. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. LaPointe.
Good evening. This was our first year with our new audit firm, Kerber Rose, and tonight we have Greg Patel with us to review the audit, the financial reports.
Thank you.
Just so that these reports were handed out at an earlier board meeting before break so that the board would have a chance to be able to review this.
Okay, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm the audit and partner on the engagement. As Dr. Keyser indicated, there are 2 reports in front of you. One is the bound financial detailed report, and the Stakeholder Management Communications letter summarizes the audit results as well as provides a little bit of summary financial information. So I'm mainly going to recap the Management Communications letter and go through that content. As I go through, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me, or I can answer your questions at the end as well. So the first page of the Management Communications letter, under the bold, underlined wording, it states that the objective of the audit is to obtain reasonable assurance that your financial statements are free of material misstatement. We have done that, and you have a clean, unmodified audit opinion. Now, there is one disclosure within the audit opinion that states that the management discussion and analysis has been omitted from the report. That's really not indicating a deficiency, but standards indicate that if you leave that out, that we add that paragraph in there. From a background perspective, the management discussion and analysis has really become very boilerplate. And how you want to really look at that is, what additional story can we tell about the district's financials that aren't already contained within these financial statements? So at the Governmental Accounting Standards Board level, or GASB, the discussion for the financial reporting model that is forthcoming in the next 5 years or so has taken a look at the MD&A and tried to figure out how we can avoid boilerplate language and be able to tell the story better and provide more color to that story. So again, just from the historical perspective of what the MD&A is and the fact that it's not really a deficiency, that it has been omitted. Now, we perform the audit in 2 main phases in order to obtain reasonable assurance, and that happens mainly in June and then August. So we have an interim audit in which we look at internal controls and we do some compliance testing with your federal and state awards. That resulted in no findings for those awards for your major programs. And then we come back in August and we do test of transactions that support the financial numbers that are contained within the detailed financial report, such as cash or your federal revenues per se. Moving on to page 2. If you look down towards the bottom under significant audit findings and qualitative aspects of accounting practices, it states that the district adopted GASB statement number 84 related to fiduciary activities. And what that really meant for you was that some of the pupil activity funds were left in the fiduciary fund section of the financial statements, and some were moved to Fund 21. So really not a substantial change. It's just moving where they were reported. Moving on to page 3. Towards the top then, the indentations indicate the most significant accounting estimates contained within your financial statements. And those really relate to the useful lives of your capital assets, the estimate of the net pension asset for your participation within the WRS system, and then the estimate of your post-employment benefits, as well as the incurred but not reported health insurance liability. Down towards the bottom of this page states that we encountered no difficulties in performing the audit, and then under corrected misstatements that all adjusting entries proposed by us are reflected within the financial statements. And that adjusting entry is attached to this communications, and there was one adjusting entry. So really, your financial team does an excellent job for the amount of different activities that you have going on within the district. They capture that accounting very well. So, moving on to page 4. At the top states that we had no disagreements with management. At the end of the audit, and once the pension and Opeb information was available to us, we provided Wendy and Joanne with a draft of the financials. They reviewed that and indicated any changes that were needed. And then they signed the management rep letter indicating that they accept responsibility for the content of the financial statements. Within the audit procedures, we consider internal control over financial reporting. And if you look on page 5 then, that results in a significant deficiency. So there are 2 thresholds there. Material weakness is the more severe finding, and then a significant deficiency is a little bit less than that. Really, that financial reporting basically states that we prepared the financial statements, and the government accounting world has changed pretty significantly even since I entered it in 2005. We were on GASB statements 43 and 45. Now we're at GASB statement 100. So the training and the ability to keep up with every little disclosure in order to avoid this finding really outweighs the benefit of doing so. And again, you can tell the strength of your financial team by having only one adjusting entry within there. Moving on to page 6, we present some,
Can you go back to page 5? So in that
Sure.
financial reporting, basically what you just said and what that paragraph says is that there's so much to keep up with, you do need somebody outside of your organization to do it.
yeah, from an efficiency standpoint and from an understanding of all of the reporting standards, most of our clients have us prepare the financial statements, and then if we do that, we have to measure it against either a material weakness or a significant deficiency, and that you have the lower of those two findings, just because your finance team is very capable of understanding what's in the financial statements. And they may not be able to prepare them exactly within the GAAP accordance, but so that's where we have that finding.
Thank you.
So then on page 6, we start with your summary financial information, and we present 5 years of historical information. We present the general fund balance first, and if you look down, total general fund balance increased just slightly, about 120,000 overall. The main number that we want to pay attention to there is your unassigned general fund balance, which means that those are resources that are available as of the new fiscal year 22. And that increased slightly from 18.2 million to 18.4 million. And what does that mean from a perspective of financial health? We explain that a little bit on page 7. We really suggest that that number is somewhere between 20 to 25% of your general fund expenditures. And there's 2 underlying reasons that are driving that suggested range. And it's really the timing of your most significant revenues. So your fiscal year starts on July 1st. You levy for your property taxes and collect them predominantly in January and February, and you still have a receivable outstanding for the August settlement. And then your federal and state aids are, they arrive predominantly also in the second half of your fiscal year. So having 20 to 25% of your general fund expenditures and fund balance at year end really allows you to smooth the operating expenses and fund the operating expenses while you wait for your most significant revenues to arrive. The district itself has adopted a minimum general fund balance policy range of 14 to 25%, and that would be approximately $13 million to $23 million. So that $18.4 million of unassigned fund balance at the end of the year falls within your minimum fund balance policy range. So we think at the end of the year, of course, that's a snapshot of a point in time, June 30th, 2021, and it doesn't foretell the budget challenges that were outlined earlier. Page 8, we put into a line graph. The blue line is the district's policy from a percentage standpoint. The red line indicates your unassigned general fund balance as a percent of your expenditures, subsequent year expenditures. And then the green line indicates the total fund balance percentage of expenditures over the past 5 years. So you can see where you've been historically. And we've really been pretty steady around somewhere between 18 to 20%. So page 9 shows a graph or a pie chart of your most significant revenues, which for you are your state sources, and they account for 83% of your revenues. And then, of course, on the expenditure side, the instruction expenditures account for 53% of your total expenditures. Page 10 indicates the funding of your district OPEB plan. And now you have a net OPEB asset of $3.7 million. And this is a closed plan, the total liability of $250,000 approximately. So within the next few years, we would advise that you work with DPI in order to dissolve the trust. And they will provide some guidance on how you can use the remaining assets as you bring those back into the general fund. So. Page 11, the exciting stuff, the upcoming accounting pronouncements. For the 22 fiscal year, GASB statement number 87 for leases will be adopted. So what we've talked to the finance team about is really kind of looking at the different contracts that are out there. There are some contracts where you might have a lease component and you'll book an asset and then a corresponding liability on the government-wide full accrual statements. In talking with them, I'm not sure that this will be a very significant accounting pronouncement to adopt. And with that, I would take any questions that you may have for me.
Thank you so much for the thorough presentation. Does anybody have any questions at this time?
You know, just a little bit more about the OPEB plan. So with the other post-employment benefits, so these are, this is what we owe current employees at retirement, or kind of just give a description of what the OPEB is, the difference, and the work that we need to do with DPI?
Yeah, at one point the district had a plan that allowed retirees to remain on the district's health care plan, and then you paid a portion of that premium. And so that liability reflects those benefits that were owed to retirees. And so the total liability at the end of the year was $250,000 because that plan has been closed. And so the membership of that plan has decreased from approximately 80 retirees to, I think, 20 retirees in the latest actuarial report.
Thank you, Vice President Levy. I know we had a question from Ms. Armstrong and Ms. LaPointe. Did you also have? No. Okay. Ms. Armstrong, did you want to jump in?
Yep. I just wanted to clarify maybe a little on the OPEB is that the district has stopped contributions to the OPEB because it is overfunded. We haven't made contributions to that plan for the last 2, possibly 3 years. I don't have my note in front of me, but we are down to the next couple of years. I think we will have 2 people still on that plan, but DPI will not allow us to take that money out of a trust until everyone is out of the plan. So even though it's overfunded, we have reached out many times to say, can we start bringing that down as we've had less people? And we are unable to take any money out of that trust because it is a trust fund until the last person is aged out of the program. So once that happens, and I believe that will happen the year after next, we will be able to close out that trust.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Armstrong. Go ahead, Vice President Levy.
Oh, just a minute. So we owe about $250. I'm rounding up. So after, you said we have like in the year 22, 23, we'll only have about 2 people left?
Yes, and that the actuary study you want to be sure, that is an estimate of what we expect. Now, they could have catastrophic losses and things, so we could see a higher. This is just what they're predicting, the claims we may expect for those 2 people.
All right. So if everything just goes well, after, in the 23-24 school year, if that is able to be dissolved, that's about 3 million that's coming back to the general fund, or we have 3 million more asset?
We would need to work with DPI on how that classification will go and where those funds, if they have to go back to our health fund or if they can go back into the general. I think Ms. LaPointe has had those conversations with DPI.
We find the money everywhere.
Yes, we should be able to move that back to the general fund. There may be some restrictions, as Ms. Armstrong said, but within a couple of years, we should be able to move that. Yep.
Like money in the couch.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions, thoughts, comments? All right. Thank you for your time on that. Let's take a look. So we do have a recommended action for this evening, which is to move acceptance of the 2020-2021 district financial audit report. Would any board member at this time like to make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Semrau, second by Schneider. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all of those in, does this require a roll call vote? Because it's a financial item, or are we okay? We're good? Okay, all of those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you both so much for taking the time to be here this evening. Thank you for all of your fine work. And I was really pleased to hear about how astute and on the mark we are. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, that takes us to our next action item, item 5B. A couple of board members have periodically brought up community engagement as a subject to discuss. Prior to COVID, we had an old board norm that talked about engaging with the community a certain number of times a year. That sort of got derailed because of, the pandemic. And so we've been sort of searching to find the appropriate time to bring this back up for discussion. Part of this work, I think, is going to come with the work that we're doing with Drew in reestablishing board norms and kind of this continuous improvement process mindset that we have. But in discussing this agenda item with Dr. Keyser, he brought up to me, if we're going to form, and it's an if because this is what we're here to kick around tonight, if we're going to create a precedent of engaging with the community on sort of hot button, high interest issues, we thought it might be prudent to take a look forward. We know the next kind of like really, aside from the budget stuff we've heard about tonight, one of the really big high interest items is going to be the SRO MOU. So we use that, Dr. Keyser recommended that we use that as an example. So just to kind of set the context for discussion, we're not here tonight to discuss whether or not we are what we are doing with any upcoming SRO MOU. What we're doing here this evening is to look at how our board works to engage with our community to get vital input in making these high interest decisions that have a huge impact on our finances and of course on our students and our teachers and their experiences. So having said that, tonight there's not necessarily a recommended action, but if we all kind of come to some consensus around a general procedure that we want to think about for how we engage our community, that is something we could take action on tonight, or we can use this discussion to inform our work with Drew and establishing in our board norms, et cetera. So given that context, I guess I want to open it up to the board. Does anybody have strong feelings, strong opinions about how we would like to go about engaging the community in these high interest issues?
I think it would be appropriate to have listening sessions with the committee once a term or once a quarter. And as passionate as involved as our community is, in a perfect world for me, I would establish those dates on an annual basis and then post what that topic of discussion or topics of discussion will be as the date approaches. I don't fear that we will ever run out of topics that our community would like to share their opinion of, which is a great thing.
Great thought. So just to clarify, because I think I heard term and quarter, are you thinking about like once every 3 months? Is that what you're looking at? Perfect. So one of the ideas that's been put out into the floor is rather than be issue driven, we could, if we plan on and kind of set dates around ahead of time, once every 3 months engaging with our community. And I just want to ask you a question to clarify, Board Member Levy, since you brought this forward. Let's say one of our dates that we had pre-established hypothetically was in April. And that would maybe include something like the SRO MOU, but maybe other issues as well. Would you foresee us bundling different topics?
Absolutely. I think that is an efficient way to move forward. And if we already have the dates, it's kind of on a save the date basis. And then checking the pulse of the community, which is board members. We should always be listening to what is important to members of our community, what issues, and it could be an education piece. So we could start out the listening session with an education on expulsion or the roles of SROs or whatever the issue is. And then the second half, et cetera, may be a listening session on the following topics.
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And that is an idea that we had, a previous board had thrown around prior to COVID as well, that education piece, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. All right, other thoughts, either building on that idea or a different direction? Go ahead.
Well, one immediate area of community engagement we'll talk about is our stakeholder engagement for our strategic plan. So that's one space, which is a different purpose. We have talked about establishing regular times for community engagement, but I think it's a little bit different. Or if it's like the public comment section, you may be speaking to 7 board members, but there's not a dialogue or action that's going back and forth, because absent of us voting to take an action, you're only listening to one board member's opinion. When I think about like that 3 o'clock meeting that was had a couple, maybe last year or something, like, seems like it was years ago, but last year, school board meetings are changing in this last year, where many cultural issues, people are coming inflamed and looking for a space to speak. We do have and invite public comment, but I think that for the good of our district and our work and our progress, you just don't roll the door open and say, who wants to come talk about whatever. We need to be considerate in how we're structuring the conversation so that productive things are happening and we're not just buying trouble when we don't have a problem. But to be able to hear our community express the desires and hopes that they have for their children's education is important. But since we are facilitating and hosting, the responsibility is on us to provide an adequate forum of civil discussion.
Thanks for bringing that up, and I'm really glad. One point that I want to just iterate quick before we continue on with our discussion is that the purpose of community engagement, public hearing, a community listening session, whatever we decide on the nomenclature there, it wouldn't be to conduct board business. So it would be perhaps carving out some time to do some community education and say, okay, here are the issues, here are kind of like the need to knows, like kind of your FAQ style information. And then we're there as a listening body where we would maybe be taking notes, possibly asking just clarifying questions, but not conducting like a back and forth discussion or board business. So like, for example, the outcome of a meeting like that might be that, Megan showed up and had some comment on this topic. And then after it's concluded, maybe I have a lot of interest in that. I'd like to follow up with her and have that discussion. I mean, that's something that, of course, any board member has the freedom to do. And like Board Member Levy pointed out, it's our duty, right, to go out and engage and be good listeners and things like that, right? But the actual formalized meeting would be similar, like you pointed out, to that public comment where we're there to listen. Go ahead.
Right, and I'm just saying Tuesday night from 7 p.m. to 3 o'clock in the morning, that is not what we are planning.
Right. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. And, I'll withhold, I have a lot of thoughts actually on this issue, but I'm going to be quiet and let everybody else discuss. So thank you for those comments. Do other board members have some thoughts on either how to establish a schedule, what the meetings might look like, if they should be issues driven versus sort of scheduled, timed driven? Go ahead, please.
I think a little bit of both. I think we should engage the community to what they want to bring to the table, and then I think we should also bring things to the table on our own. Like, we're having, a lot of people come to us and ask about a certain thing, then I think we should bring that to them and say, okay, we want to let you guys understand this better. And then also give them some kind of a floor. I mean, not the 2 a.m. floor, but some kind of floor to say, hey, this is something I either don't understand or something that I'm concerned about. And can you help me understand, or can you help us change something? Something along those lines.
Thank you for that. Just to add a little bit of so in the not that we're bound to the past, and when Dr. Kieser and I were discussing this agenda item, I think one thing that kind of came up that we wanted to iterate to everybody is we're not necessarily bound by past practice. So I will just offer up that one thing that we've done, because this is about like how we move forward and maybe blaze some trails in community engagement. In the past, particularly something that came up with the reopening of schools because of our sort of infamous meeting there, is we decided it would be wise to have like a public hearing on a specific topic. And in listening to what your comments were and thinking about what Board Member Levy offered up, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have scheduled community engagement pieces and then also have issues-driven public hearings. And actually, I want to drill down into that. So if I can, so board members who like that train of thought, there's a question about when we have a high-interest topic, so like, well, since it's listed in here, let's use the SRO MOU as an example. Would it be preferable to have, for example, the SRO MOU brought up early as a discussion-only item for us first? Then once we've discussed it, gotten the issues out there, then hold a public hearing for people's input, and then bring it back for a discussion item similar to kind of our committee structure? Or do we start with a public hearing and then go to the board? What are your thoughts, Ms. Semro?
I absolutely think we should educate first. I think that will eliminate a lot of confusion and give people a direction. I think that's essential. I really like that idea of coming back around at the end, though.
All right, sounds good. Any other thoughts on that? Kind of a public hearing versus, and again, we're not bound to, this is just kind of my concepts. We don't have to stick to these names. I mean, whatever the group wants to do here. Any other thoughts?
I would think if we're going to plan a community engagement, even if it's on a single topic, that we need to discuss it beforehand so that we can be better prepared for that open comment time as we do it. I like the idea of education and then having a listening session after that, and then coming back with the board to discuss it again after that.
So far, it sounds like we have, I guess I want to go back to Board Member Levy. Because you're the one who originally brought up like kind of like the community listening. So are you hearing any ideas that are contradictory to what you envisioned?
No, I would like to have a minimum number scheduled so our community knows what to expect. There's a regular cadence and we're normalizing engagement. I love the idea of having topics listed and we do an education piece and then open the floor. Now, I'm also not opposed to what Board Member Simmer was saying. You have to get, what if I have a concern that's not one of your 3 bulleted things? I mean, we could decide that then you come to public comment and do that. But I think that the piece for me, if I was I am a community member, but if I was not a board member and a community member, when I voice it, I don't want to just voice it out into a vacuum. I think we need to have some way of follow-up or posting a response. I don't think it's productive to engage in the dialogue in the moment, but just so people know, 1, I was heard, and 2, this is the response.
So I just want to take a point to summarize because we've got a lot of ideas. But before are you sure? You want to go ahead? Go ahead, jump in, Vice President Levy.
Summarize that. The other part of the communication, I think, which should not be lost, is when people are expressing to the board, if we don't have an action item in front of us, the thing that you just came and talked about, many of the things are not for the 7 of us to do. They are things that the administration, through Dr. Kieser, would accomplish at some point as a board member. However that specific issue is crafted, we have to turn into a board action for the superintendent to be delegated to the superintendent for him to take care of for us. But that some things that community members, I think, have to be clear about that, so people don't have an expectation of action from the 7 of us when the work or the thing that they're asking to be done is not something the 7 of us collectively or individually can do. But if they want to make it a priority issue that the district addresses through the superintendent, they have to understand that, and we have to create that understanding.
May I? I completely agree. And for example, in the most basic way, the board is responsible for 3 things: for hiring and supervising a superintendent, for approving a budget, and for maintaining and introducing policy. Like, that is it. And I think community members may have a different view of what they believe is in the board's purview, and that's really on administration. And that might be an opening segue for a listening session. Like, this is the role of the board. It's these 3 things. Anything outside of that, that is the role of the superintendent and their team. And just having that clear, then part of the response could be the redirection. No, this is a question for our superintendent and his team. I think that might be helpful.
So just to summarize, I love the idea of that education piece that you introduced, because I do think that as elected people, it is on us to bridge gaps in understanding and engage with the community in that way. Like I mentioned earlier, like with our budget, like we want to build understanding through whatever forms are appropriate. So what I'm hearing is I've got a T-chart going here. So on one side of the T-chart, we've got kind of a community listening session that follows a regular schedule that is set with pre-established dates. And what would occur in that community listening session at what I would assume would be strategically selected times when we know we have stuff coming up, right? There would be some kind of whatever topic-driven appropriate education piece. There would be then an open floor for people to speak and be heard. There would be a determined course of follow-up, whether it's maybe people sign in with their, contact information. Maybe it's an individual follow-up. Maybe we address it at the end of an agenda item. But there would be communication to people as to how that follow-up would occur. And it would also be an opportunity to clarify what is board and what is admin, but certainly we could pass information back to our administration. So I just want to, did I summarize this side of the T-chart, the community listening piece? Is there some consensus around, before I jump over to the other one, is there some consensus around that as a concept? Go ahead.
I don't know if I missed a couple of different things. Like, one, every time we have this regular meeting, which is every other week, there's a public comment section, so people have an opportunity to come speak if they want to speak. To create a special place for public engagement, I'm in agreement with Board Member Levy that if it is regular, then you're not ruled by the passions of is it mask or not mask. We having police in school, not having police. People have to get vaccinated or not. Those things will come, but if our regular pattern is, hey, every 3 months we have this session, then people have the opportunity to speak. So you're not doing anything reactionary to the hot issue of the day. There's a regular time period of conversation for things that matter to the education of our children. So that kind of the space of like whatever falls in that session falls in that session. It's not ruled by the topic. It's just that this is a regular form of communication because it's about the relationship and engagement that we have with the people that we're serving.
I appreciate that. And one thing, if I can piggyback on that, when you talked about how people have the opportunity every other week to come for public comment, the last time we did a really broad community listening session was, I want to say January of 2020, I believe. And some of the feedback that we got at that time was, could we do things on Sunday afternoons? And that was the well, no, I mean, because that's when people, it was what the reasoning that people gave at that time, if I'm remembering correctly, is that it's after church, people are free and able to come, and I think that's why, I mean, that was just some notes that I'd written down from back then. And so I think that, yes, people have the access to public comment. Yes, we've made it, because of COVID, has actually opened up a lot of doors for communication because there's the email option and all that we're reading now as well. I think that's going to stay. But I think, like you said, to kind of like, so we're not at the mercy of whatever inflamed passion there is, like just that regularly scheduled time at a time that is kind of community, family accessible. There are people who work second shift who can't come to these meetings, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And so I think that that would be another benefit that I see personally in doing that kind of regularly scheduled piece, just to kind of build off your comment there. Other thoughts on just the community listening piece? Yeah.
If I may add, just to elaborate on what you said, and I would envision if we're doing 4 sessions a year, maybe 2 are in the morning, 2 are in the evening, 1 during the, or, 2 during the week, 2 on the weekends, et cetera. So you may not be able to make all of them, but you're not excluded from all of them as well. And then I also like the idea, which we have discussed previously, of not always having them on school property, because some people may not be comfortable with that. If we go to a community space that can safely hold people, if we go to the library, et cetera, it may open it up to people who are not comfortable with coming kind of on the educational turf, so to speak, for whatever reason.
Does anybody have any views to the contrary of anything that's been put forward under the kind of the community listening umbrella here? So I'll take that to understand that we're all good with having regularly scheduled community listening sessions with like a calendar sort of set ahead of time, which would include a community education piece, open floor for the community, an established kind of map, I'm almost envisioning like a flow chart for follow-up that people would know ahead of time so they understand how they'll be communicated with afterwards. But no formal board action would occur at these meetings. It's an opportunity to delineate between board and administrative kind of purview, right? That these would be regularly occurring at accessible times and accessible locations. Is there consensus around this piece? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Okay, now not to say that we can't come back to this, but I want to switch over to the other side of the T-chart that I drew here, which is then kind of what I'm calling like a public hearing, which would be driven by specific issues that maybe don't quite fit into the timeliness of how we've set up community listening sessions. So again, going back to Dr. Keyser's recommended example, like looking at the SRO MOU, we have to review in the spring and then approve in July, I believe. Is that right?
We have to review in the spring and approve by the end of March.
Oh, by the end of March. Oh, for some reason I thought July. Okay. Oh, because it expires July of 22, but it has to be approved by the end of March. Okay. Got it. Sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. So that would be, in my opinion and my understanding, which is just one person's opinion and understanding, an example for something more like Ms. Semrau suggested, where it's more of like a public hearing. So what I've written down for that is that it would be issues driven. It would be a discussion only at the board first, so that we can do some education, then get input, then take action. So how does is there consensus around that? Or are there things that we need to add, clear up, or change?
I just have a question for that. My initial envisioning of that is that would be separate from a listening session. So it wouldn't necessarily be at this time, this date, whatever, but more along the lines of making it very public of the decision that the board is going to have to make, and then offer multiple channels for people. So the email, if we had like a phone line for a designated amount of time, that we would do that instead of having a separate physical listening session.
That's a great Sam, that's something I hadn't considered. Thanks for bringing that up. So what we do for the budget hearing is we have, what is it, usually like half an hour kind of scheduled? Go ahead, Dr. Keyser.
Yeah, so similar to using the example of the budget, we have a separate budget meeting that has a public hearing as part of it. And so, yes, we do have a phone line. It does not have to be that way, but if the board would want multiple ways, we could set up email, in person, as well as a dial-in option for a period of time, collect the feedback, and then ultimately the board uses that feedback to make its part of its deliberation and decision.
So one thing that I would like to add to that, if we did do something of that style, what do board members think about I don't really see an issue where it wouldn't involve this, inviting like the BEA and any other stakeholders to be there as representative bodies, not that would preclude other teachers or anybody from speaking or weighing in.
Well, intent of whether it be a community listening session or public hearing would be that it would be publicly noticed. So all parties would, no one would get a special invite. Everyone is invited.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. What are people's thoughts on this kind of continuing this discussion on public hearing, about the timing, the content? What are our thoughts? Vice President Levy?
I think that depending on what the issue is, I guess we would have to decide, do we need a public hearing? Or is this just regular business that would happen at a regular meeting? I think that you're elected leaders, so you'll make some tough decisions. I just don't think that as we stage the decisions that have to be made, that you intentionally make them more difficult by the forum in which things are being discussed. There needs to be opportunity for people to have discussion and dialogue for understanding. But as I said before, you don't create an environment where there's just conflict because there's differences of opinion, and then there's just a vote and there's a winner or a loser, because we are a community. And you have to think about people having an understanding of things, the opportunity for people to be reconciled to each other, because conversations that are poorly handled can have disastrous outcomes in our community. I know we mentioned the past. These last type of hearings or forums that have been conducted in that manner in this community by this board in the past have all been at crisis points. So I think that since we are the elected people at this matter, for anything that we have to decide how we go about presenting the information, noticing our public that this is something that we're going to take up, and then working our way through a decision so we can have decisions and move our district forward. And that's where I'm coming from.
No, thank you for that. And I think the issue is, like you pointed out, like we have public comment. I think in the past where we've seen kind of like you talked about making kind of crisis point decisions is when there hasn't been sort of like a proactive attempt to carve out the necessary space and time to give people that input. But you're right that needs to balance up against, like how we conduct business. And so I guess my question in considering, like, for example, like this spring, we're going to look at this MOU. Is that something, what do we think about the idea of bringing it up twice like we did the other kind of, like the school reopening items where there were a lot of different opinions so that the community can hear from our administration, see the presentation, hear our discussion, weigh in on it, and then we would come back to it at a different time so that, we're making a decision not on the tail of what could potentially be a heated public comment, but give that space for public comment and then come back. Board Member Levy, I think, go ahead.
So I just have a clarifying question. Why is the budget process slightly different than how we handle any other issue? And by slightly different, I mean we open up more avenues for discussion before a formal decision is made. What is the reasoning for that difference?
So it's in statute. Ms. Armstrong, did you want to weigh in on that?
I was just going to say that there is strict statutes on how you have to have it publicized 30 days beforehand. You have to have a preliminary presentation. Then you have to have a separate budget hearing on a day that no other board business can be conducted, and it can't be on a day that is normally scheduled board meeting. So, I mean, that is very strict because it is setting your levy and approving your budget in the public forum of taxpayers.
Thank you. I'm clear on that portion, but the phone line, the special email, that portion of it, I think maybe outside of the technical statute, Why is that addition there? And the reason I ask is because if we understand the motivation for that additional avenues to communicate, that may help us in how we determine what our avenues for communication will be for other decisions.
And Board Member Levy, I'm glad that you asked that second part of the question, because when I had asked when I first came here in regards to that, the answer that was given to me was because of the situation we were in with the pandemic, typically it would have been a in-person meeting. The ad of email and the phone line was in response to the fact that we were all remote at that time. So it's not something that has to continue, but it has now become part of our practice in the 2 short years that we've been doing it.
Good to know. So, Vice President Levy, if I'm hearing you correctly, you are in favor of us treating, for example, the SRO decision that needs to happen in March as we would any other decision, and leaving public comment as the avenue by which community, and of course people can email us, call us, et cetera, would communicate with us publicly. Is that accurate?
Well, I wasn't speaking particularly to the SRO thing because I guess I was told that that was just an example for this discussion. But our regular process, and it does take time to get to this, but what we have developed for ourselves through our governance committee is a norm that when things come to the committee, when we're taking action, the first time it comes up, it's like a report. We hear it, and then the second time it comes up, we take action. So for anything, just like the policies or in the Operations and Finance Committee tonight, we talked about a telephone project. We received information about it. We're able to ask questions, have discussion at the committee level. It's going to come up again a second time in the committee, and then it'll come to the board, and the board will have the opportunity to talk about it and vote for it or against it. So any item, it has an appropriate committee that it should begin in. I guess for items of higher higher interest, you know, I think that the board president speaking with the media could properly notice our community that this is a space to discuss it. The committee chairman, we had talked about some of our norms of recognizing people that want to speak. You know, we could implement our public comment section at that, knowing that it is an item of high interest, and the public comment could happen during the committee meeting, and then we just move forward in regular order. We don't have to create total new things because we've already worked ourselves to a process of how we handle certain things.
Thank you for that clarification, and I want to admit, because I like the idea of normalizing the decision-making, and I'm a little nervous about saying, oh, this is of high public interest, but this is not, and so we're going to treat this differently. So I would be in favor of, as we discussed before, having the regularly scheduled listening sessions with the education piece, et cetera, and then opening up a public comment section for our committee meetings. And so people have clear spaces where you decide if it's high interest or not. And if it is high interest for you, then please come down to our committee meetings. There will be a designated space for you to share your concerns. I think that may work well instead of us deciding what's most important to the community and then treating it differently.
I appreciate that summary, clarification, and kind of direction there. What I would add to that is if we're going to do that, there should probably be some thought put into how long that public comment should be scheduled for. Well, right, but how wide a breadth of space? Because for even I love the idea of democratizing the process of determining what's important and what's not. That makes a ton of sense. It could be one person showing up for one issue for 3 minutes, or I think there has to be, I think that committee chairs have to kind of have their ear to the ground, though. We know this, and the reason I think that Dr. Keyser suggested the SRO MOU as an example, we know it's high interest. Like, we're not, we don't have our heads in the ground about that. It's an important issue for a lot of people. So I think when that would come up through a committee meeting, we'd have to be proactive and say, you know what, we're going to carve out X number more minutes for this meeting because we anticipate which I think in the past we have failed to do. I mean, so I think we just need to be proactive and responsive to the community in that way, which I think in addition to what Vice President Levy was saying about, let's notice people properly, make sure the communication's out there. This is when this is going to come up for the first discussion. We want your input. We just have to maybe give some, maybe widen our expectations for how, like, the length of those committee meetings.
No,
Right.
I like that. And just a potential idea is when we notice things, this is the chair of that committee, feel free to reach out to them via email. And then if part of that, maybe prior to public comment, you read the statement, et cetera, but you may summarize, like, I received 13 emails and here are the bullet points from what community members are saying. And then if people understand that that information has been heard and acknowledged, that may streamline the rest of the comments that need to come to the floor. Not that you want to curtail anyone, but I like the idea of carving out time for it.
What are other board members' thoughts on this? I guess my question to the board is, we had two kind of different styles of community outreach and input. One was kind of the community listening session with the scheduled times, and one was the issues driven. For those of us who care about making sure we have a mechanism for people to speak on an issues-driven basis, does the idea of using the committee meetings and public comment time there satisfy that need, or is there something additional that we need there? Go ahead.
As I look at the committee meetings now, we often, the committee meetings run overtime, delaying the meetings that follow afterwards. To add a listening session to that means we would have to restructure committee meetings so that they are not on the same night as board meetings, which will then take another evening of time for those committee meetings. That's something to consider as we begin looking at that. If we lengthen committee meetings, then we need to restructure how we do things.
Thank you. And I just want to add that one of the considerations that when we did recently restructure our committee piece was to kind of be respectful of administration's time as well. So I just want to kind of throw that out there. Dr. Heiser, what are your thoughts?
In hearing the conversation, the idea of opening up community listening session or public comment section in the committee will reduce the number. If we're going to keep the timing the same, we've done not 100%, but we've done pretty good with trying to keep the committees to that 1 hour so that we can start the HR at 6:30. That will add to the conversation. We will have to reduce the number of presentations and topics we can bring to committee. We may have to rethink the idea of at the committee level going through the 2 cycles for some things, and the committee will, and if the board's comfortable with it, the committee could make the determination, no, we want to bring this back another month. This one we want to approve tonight after hearing it once and bring it forward because we feel that it is pretty straightforward. The issues are known. It is not complicated. It's something we've seen before, whatever the rationale is. But that would have to be articulated. But then it's also going to be additional expectations on the chair to more fully explain during the committee portion all of the nuances to the rest of the board members. Using the example, something like the SRO MOU, very much like the budget conversation. This has a lot of nuance to it, and having the chair bring that to the full board so that the full board, all the board members, not just the 3 or 4 that show up to the committee meeting, gets the full context without having to re-present all that information at the full board, because that was the other piece, not bringing things to present in multiple venues. So I think it's workable. I agree with Board Member Schneider's assessment that without extending the committee time, so either pushing back the start of our HR and our regular board meetings a little bit later. We either have to put some tight parameters around the public comment, or we'll have to make some adjustments at the committee level that not all action items at the committee level will go through the 2-cycle. Some of those may come to the board quicker than just that once every other month.
Thank you for that. And I'm wondering how people feel about, since we haven't set aside a schedule as of yet for community listening sessions, I'm curious if we test this. What do we think about testing this out and maybe setting a community listening session that would include a discussion of the SRO MOU sometime? I mean, would you think prudent to be like sometime in February if we have to make that decision in March? What do you think, Dr. Keyser?
So if we use the same structure that we currently established, because this is something that comes through pupil services, it would come through the Teaching, Learning, Equity, Pupil Services Committee. It would come in the 3rd week in February, and then the 3rd week in March. If approved at that committee level, it would come straight to the full board that very night, and then have a conversation. So it'd have, in essence, three public comment sessions if we add public comments to the committees, 1 in February and 2 in March, 1 at the committee and 1 at the regular board level, and then approval before the end of the March to meet that deadline.
So just to shoot for the moon, if we try and see how successful it is. Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you mind if I just respond? I'm sorry. Okay, so if we just try the public comment in committee meetings to test the waters, and we were to schedule a community listening session maybe like that 4th week of February or like that 1st week of March.
You mean outside of our regular board
Yep,
meetings?
like if that were going to be our trial community listening session to test out kind of that first category, the education, open floor, follow-up, et cetera, that we discussed.
Then what we could do is have the presentation in February, have a listening session outside of, perhaps on a weekend or something like that. Board members that can attend, it would be recorded, and then bring it back in March.
Okay, so I have a couple. So Board Member Levy and Vice President Levy both had some thoughts in that order. Board Member Levy, go ahead.
So I wouldn't test it out on a high interest topic, and I wouldn't double dip. So I wouldn't do public comment for it in the committee and have a separate listening session. I just don't think that's efficient. My other comment was, is there a fail-safe? Because we do have a deadline, because sometimes items get stuck in committee. And so what if there's not consensus to push it out of committee and it doesn't come before the full board and we miss the deadline? I'm just hopeful that is being considered and there's a plan for that.
The fail-safe in the MOU is that if a decision is not made by the end of March, it automatically renews under the same terms of the old contract.
So here is my concern / suggestion. I think any item that has a contractual component needs to come directly to the full board, because if it doesn't, then that could be 3 board members making a decision that should have been a full board decision if it doesn't make it out of committee and it renews as is by default, when that may not be the will of the majority of the full board.
So what I'm hearing, can I just to clarify, and then I want to go to Vice President Levy, would it be your preference to, so we had, according to Dr. Keyser, Teaching Learning was supposed to, the committee was supposed to get that the 3rd week of February, that initial report. Would you like the board, the full board, to get that report at our business meeting on the 3rd week of February?
Correct.
Okay. Vice President Levy?
A while back, I made a comment about navigation. You got to tell somebody it's time to turn before they get right up on the turn. If we have contractual obligations and we are following our regular order, and they just don't happen, and so things happen, that's a part of us and how we function, whether it's working or not working. I am the chair of the Teaching, Learning, Equity, and Pupil Service Committee, and so if this is the regular order that it would come, that's how it comes. We do a lot of things that are contractual and have implications. So what we need to do is take the action and the time that's necessary to get things done. As we're having this conversation, other than current events, which are different than the reality on the ground in different places. We're Beloit, we're not other places. What our community needs are what our community needs are. We haven't had a chance to discuss that yet, but even as we discuss something that needs to be discussed, it's still important how we do it. And based on what we're talking about tonight and our conversation about how to engage our community, the committee chair meets with the superintendent to talk about like the agenda items and things that need to come up. Maybe we need a governance meeting. Maybe we need for the chair and the superintendent to talk about issues, and then at another open session meeting discuss when we're going to talk about or how certain things will be handled, the board business. But as this conversation is going on, it's a little bit long in the tooth. And the things that need to get done that are coming up by this conversation, I'm not in favor of working like this. It means if it's a committee item, I'll sit with the superintendent and talk about it. We can communicate to the board how that item is going to come up. It'll be inclusive. It'll be a open session item, but there's got to be more thinking than what's happening.
So may I ask a clarifying question, Vice President Levy? So here is my concern. Worst case scenario is it gets stuck in committee and 3 people end up making a decision that a minimum of 4 people should agree to. Are you open to it goes through committee and we run our normal process, but the understanding is it will be passed on to the full board for a decision to be made? Because if the committee cannot agree and it doesn't come to the full board, then 2 people are making a decision that should be made by a minimum of 4. That's my only concern. But I do want to be respectful of using our committee process the way it's established for work to be done there, and then it comes to the full board.
Okay. So what you have to think about, Board Member Levy, is at some point in time, this is a 4-year agreement, like 4 years ago, either it was 4-3, 5-1, 4-3, 5-2, 6-1, 7-0, that those people made that agreement. And then there's a renewal, but it still goes through the committee. Like you said earlier, things die in committee sometimes. They don't go forward. So if it did or didn't go forward, it's not the committee making that decision. It's a continuation of what was already in place. That's what was agreed to.
So, Board Member Schneider?
Because you can't
Oh,
guarantee
Point of
an
order.
action of what's going to happen in the committee.
We are off topic, we are off agenda, this is not an agenda item.
All right. So at this time, what we need to determine is, it sounds like we had consensus around community listening sessions. Is that correct? Would anybody be, I guess what we need to determine is, do we want to, at a future time, set a calendar of community listening sessions like we talked about, and then in the meantime, incorporate public comment into committee? Or at this time, do we want to put kind of maybe the public comment and committee meetings to, like, could that go to a governance committee agenda? We could kind of chew on that a little bit more. And then schedule a community listening session between when the committee hears the SRO contract would be the next thing, for example, and then when that decision would come to the full board. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should hold off on the committee thing and take some more time to think about that process and what implications that has. But I do think we should go forward with the listening sessions.
Okay, so public comment in committee, sounds like maybe we've got one person in favor of putting that to the governance committee to discuss further. Are there any comments contrary to what Board Member Semrau has put forward? So is everybody, do we have consensus that we would plan to try out our first community listening session, which would include but not be limited to a discussion about the SRO MOU, following kind of that model that we all sort of had consensus around sometime either the fourth week of February, between the fourth week of February and the third week of March. All right, so do we need to take any formal action on that, or it sounds like we have consensus? It would just have to be, you said that it's going to come to the committee on the third week of February. So we would want to, in the spirit of true community engagement, schedule a community listening session at the earliest, I guess, the fourth week of February, and at the latest, like the second week of March, since it sounds like it'll come potentially to the full board, assuming it passes committee that third week of March. Is that right?
Correct. So it would come on the 15th and then again on March 15th. So we're in a non-leap year. So yes,
Perfect. Okay, so
it would be, yes, the week of the 21st of February or the week of March 1st.
Fantastic. Okay, so do we have board consensus on this plan of action going forward? Or, okay, so last call. Are there any contrary thoughts or opinions to taking this course of action? Okay, hearing none, then.
Explain to me,
yes.
what are we doing?
Yes, so just to recap, the idea right now would be, we got a lot of really good ideas today. We're going to take the public comment in committee meeting idea and put it on the next governance committee agenda to discuss further, to potentially bring back to the full board. And in the meantime, since it sounds like we had consensus around the idea of doing regularly scheduled community listening sessions, that we would like to schedule our first community listening session to occur between the third week of February and the third week of March, so that it would encompass a discussion on the SRO issue.
So the thing that I want to say right now is when we look at our strategic planning, this is around the same time we're supposed to be doing listening sessions to understand the priorities of our community and to have them articulate their vision of a learner. I don't understand. I understand our schedule, but I don't understand a public hearing or a listening session for the MOU conversation in the middle of the other purpose that we're trying to achieve.
So do you feel like that one community listening session with one purpose would interfere with the other purposed community listening engagement pieces for strategic planning?
Yeah, I think both of them will affect each other.
Okay, any other thoughts on that?
I don't know, I feel like they're different veins, you know what I mean? The looking to build the learner, I mean, that's a targeted type of thing, like we're coming here to do this. This is what we need from you. I think the other thing is more of an open, like, educational type of thing about a specific area. I think they're a little different, is what I'm saying. I think that there's room for both, I guess.
Okay, so we got two opinions on the table. One is that the community listening session would contradict the strategic planning engagement, and one opinion that it wouldn't. Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Board Member Schneider.
there may be some people that could only attend one or the other, but then they have to make their choice as to what's the most important one for them. I think they're different topics. I think both are important, that we should do them both.
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
I'm fine with both as long as they're appropriately spaced.
Good point. And yeah, and we are still working with the Battelle group to get those scheduled. So that's definitely something we can make considerations for. Thank you for that. Oops, sorry. Any other thoughts? All right. So do we want to, I know we don't have, it sounds like we don't have total agreement. Do we want to try to come to consensus, or would somebody like to make a formal motion, I guess, would be our two courses of action here.
I move to schedule a listening session for the MOU for SROs at some point between the third week in February and the third week of March 2022.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion by Levy, second by Semrau, to schedule a community listening session, which would include, but not be limited to, right, a discussion on the SRO MOU sometime between the third week of February and the third week of March. Any discussion on that motion? All right, hearing none. Did I miss? Oh, no. Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion passes 5-1. And that takes us to consent agenda. All right, at this time, would anybody like to pull anything from the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, would anybody like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Semrau, second by Schneider to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? All right, that takes us to item 7A, future board meeting dates. The Policy Committee meets tomorrow, Wednesday, January 5th at 5 p.m., which is a change from the usual 5:30 start time. So please note the change in time, 5 p.m. Special board meetings will be held tomorrow at 6:15 and 7:15, and those special meetings will be held primarily in closed session. Special board meeting next will be Tuesday, January 11th at 6:30 p.m. Teaching, Learning, Equity, and People Services Committee next meets Tuesday, January 18th at 5:30 p.m. Human Resource, which is a committee of the whole board, meets Tuesday, January 18th at 6:30 p.m. Our regular board meeting will meet Tuesday, January 18th at 7 p.m. There will be a state school board convention ranging from January 19th through the 21st held in Milwaukee, where there will be board members present. The Governance Committee meets next Tuesday, January 25th at 6 p.m. Business Operations and Finance will meet Tuesday, February 1st at 5:30 p.m. Human Resources Committee of the Whole will meet Tuesday, February 1st at 6:30 p.m. And our next regular board meeting, or first one in February, I should say, will be Tuesday, February 1st at 7 p.m. Any additions to that or changes? All right, so at this time, we're going to conclude all of our open session business for this evening. And at this time, a motion may be made and a vote taken to convene the Board of Education into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C, relative to considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion by Schneider, second by Semrau. Any discussion? Okay, may we please have a roll call vote?
Yes, Allison Semrau.
Aye.
Greg Schneider.
Aye.
Joyce Ruff. Sean Levy.
Aye.
Megan Miller.
Aye.
Amy Levy.
Aye.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, thank you, Board. That passes unanimously. Thank you to all of those who attended virtually or in person this evening. We appreciate the community participation, and we'll see you next time. Happy New Year, everybody.
You have been removed from the call. Goodbye.